A new book called A Deadly Marriage is the true story of the killing of Irishman Jason Corbett. He was killed by his nanny-turned-wife Molly Martens and her father Tom Martens. His two young children lived with Jason's killers for 15 days after their father was beaten to death in their home.
What emerges in all of the documentation, and I got an entire tranche of emails between Jason and Molly beginning 3 weeks after she arrived in Ireland. What emerges from that is Molly, looked down on Jason. She felt he wasn't good enough for her because he didn't have a university education, even though she herself was a college dropout. She would frequently rebuke him for his grammar, but she also rebuked him about his failure to make her pregnant.
Even though he had proven his own fertility
absolutely,
with his two
Jack
children.
and Sarah are proof of his fertility. But there are emails there, and Jason, he's constantly asking her in these emails, just to calm down, stop hitting out, stop pushing me, stop slamming down phones. And he starts a few months before the killing, he sends himself an email, like an aide memoir, and he writes in it about how Molly is abusing him for his loser sperm. And she calls him fat and obese and, really insulting language, which in the context of the Martens presenting this as having been a case of domestic abuse where Tom and Molly were defending themselves is very interesting because the emails clearly show that it was Molly who was abusing Jason.
Now, the extraordinary things that she was doing, recording him, covert recordings, even in his car. So she may have got information about Jason's plans when he was having conversations in his car, indicating that he wanted to come back to Ireland, that he was going to divorce Molly, all of those kind of things. These may have been prompts to force her into taking the violent action that she did.
Absolutely. The detectives believe that Molly, they don't believe that she intended to kill Jason on the night, but they believe that she intended to provoke what they called an explosive event, some kind of a dispute, while Tom Martens was in the house. And what she was doing was she was hoping to get an emergency custody order because she had consulted one of her neighbours who happened to be a family lawyer who told her, you have no rights because he won't allow you to adopt the children, but you can seek an emergency custody order, but you need to prove that he's a domestic abuser. So put these secret recordings all around the house. And she did that. And one of the recording devices she placed was in Jason's car. And what I found out, which could actually be quite critical, is that Jason was concerned that Molly was listening in on his conversations when he was talking to his family or friends back in Ireland. So his best friend was a guy called Paul Dillon. And Jason developed a practice of only talking to Paul while he was in the car on the way to work. And Paul remembers this conversation, and he's absolutely certain it was in the car because he remembers the GPS coming up in the background. Yeah. And in this conversation, they're discussing, is Jason going to move back to Ireland? And he says that his plan is to go back to Ireland, that Molly is as, quote, crazy as ever. And if things get bad, he's going to bring the kids back to Ireland and then go back and divorce Molly. So about 3 weeks before the killing, Jack was asked to clean out Jason's car, and he discovered this recording device. So he showed it to his dad. His dad confronted Molly. But the significance of that is Jason must have realized not only that she was recording him in the car, but if she was recording him in the car, she may well have learned of his plans that he'd discussed with Paul, that he was going to leave her and come home.
It's an extraordinary story. I mean, the devious nature of all of this. There's so much to talk about here, but I obviously we won't go through it all. And I would invite people to read the book because it's fascinating in its level of detail. But there are things that I hadn't come across before, I don't think even in the documentary, that the forensic people who were examining the crime scene and Jason's body found the blood was more congealed than it should have been, given the alleged timing of the killing, that his body was colder, the blood was more congealed, that they delayed possibly for a couple of hours before they called 911, and that various things may have happened in that interregnum.
Absolutely. I mean, when all of the paramedics, the detectives, they all found that the body was cold, blood congealed. The lead detective and the sheriff both told me on the record that they are firmly of the belief that the Martens delayed calling 911 until Jason was actually dead. The 911 operator is on the record saying that she believes Tom and Molly faked CPR. And what they were doing was trying to gather their story. And Tom Martens actually, when he finished his interview, because he's an FBI agent, he knew exactly, but the recording was off. And when they were in the corridor after the interview, he said to the lead detective, we may not have called straight away. I needed a few minutes to get ourselves together. And what the detective told me is what he meant was we needed to get our story straight. We needed to get Molly calmed down and have a story that we could tell the cops.
There is the impression, I suppose, in this country generally, even after your Netflix documentary, that maybe there wasn't an enthusiasm on the part of the investigators and the prosecution to nail Molly and Tom. That's not true.
I don't believe so, no. And I've spoken to all of the lead officers involved in this. In fact, the sheriff was outraged at the suggestion that Tom's FBI career might have influenced them. He said that they described the FBI as the first bunch of idiots. They actually did a fairly thorough investigation, but the book uncovers evidence that was removed from the crime scene. And there's a significant twist in the book which shows not only that was evidence removed, I found where it went.
We won't give that twist away, but we can talk about the laptop that you saw in the evidential photographs taken at the crime scene, which never showed.
Well, there were more than 900 photographs taken at the scene, and there was also a crime scene video. And I got access to those, and still on the crime scene video, there's a bedside locker on Jason's side of the bed, and poking out at the end of the bedside locker is the front half of a laptop. And Jack had told me before I found this that Jason used to keep his laptop in that exact location. So what the photograph and the video shows, it was there and it was removed, and it isn't in the evidence log.
So that has got to be explained. Now, the people who were involved, obviously there was Molly and Tom, her father, but also her mother was in the house, and strangely, even though the scene of mayhem that occurred there, I mean, the vicious killing of Jason must have been noisy, she heard nothing.
Yes, and it was said in open court by the assistant district attorney that, they did not believe Sharon's story. They said they did not believe that any grandmother would be asleep in the basement with the master bedroom directly overhead. They hear their daughter screaming. They know their grandchildren are upstairs. They know her husband is up there. She's seen him leave with a baseball bat, and Sharon's story is that she fell back to sleep. Now, there is also forensic findings. On the brick, there were 25 hairs found. 24 of them were Jason's. One was a mystery hair, which was unidentified, but the forensic finding was that it bore genetic similarities to Molly. Now, the only other person, and it wasn't Tom, so the only other person in the house with genetic similarities to Molly was Sharon. So how did Sharon's hair get on the brick? She could conceivably say she was a regular enough visitor to the house. Her hair was there on the carpet anyway. The decision was taken by the detectives and the prosecutors not to have three defendants. It would be easier to bring a prosecution just against Tom and Molly. So Sharon escaped, but she was named as a defendant in a wrongful death claim, which was taken by Jason's estate, and that claim was settled out of court.
Now, when they were jailed, I mean, they were found guilty, they then appealed, and all sorts of stuff was brought up, and the whole question about Jason's first wife who died of an asthma attack. They were trying to shed doubts on Jason in that regard. All of it absolute nonsense, but that's what I suppose lawyers do. They pick on anything they can, however outlandish, and present that. In the event a retrial was ordered, but the Department of Justice there decided not to. Was that about money simply?
Well, what happened was that the Martens successfully appealed their conviction. Their convictions were quashed, but the original charges were not vacated.
Yeah,
so there should have been a retrial. But the district attorney, who would be like our equivalent of the DPP, took the decision to enter into a plea deal with the Martens instead. Now, they would say they told me that their principal reason was that Jack and Sarah would have to take the stand and give evidence, and they were worried about the psychological impact that would have on them, and they were worried, that if they lost the case, it could be extremely damaging for them. But I also was told that, logistics and money were certainly a factor here, because several of the lead detectives had retired, as had two of the prosecutors, and I was told by people in the department that there was very limited resources in the budget. There was a backlog of cases. They took the decision, let's not risk losing it.
Let's go for a
deal.
And they went for a deal which was involuntary manslaughter. In other words, effectively, the Martens, game, set and match, they killed Jason.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, it was voluntary manslaughter was the actual plea deal. But Tom pleaded guilty, accepted that. Molly refused to say the word guilty. She would only enter a no contest plea, which in law is the same thing. She's still a felony. She still has a felony conviction. But even after all this time, 8 years after the killing, after everything Jack and Sarah had been put through, she would not even do that much further.
They served very little time because of the time they had already served. They were out within 7 months, I think, of that finding. The layout of your book is terrific because at the beginning you give us the dramatis personae. You lay it out, the Jason and Molly, Jack and Sarah as the family unit. Then the Martens, the extended Martens family, the brothers and so on. Then the Corbett Lynch families in Limerick, Fitzpatrick family in Limerick, Dags Fitzpatrick, his first wife. And then you look at all the neighbours and all the investigators and all the rest. So when I was reading the book, anytime I needed to so who is that and what did they do? I could go back to that dramatis personae at the beginning of the book, and you have, in each case, kind of a summary of the role they played in the whole saga.
Yes, it's such a complicated story, and it was so protracted over, several court cases and over 8 years that I thought it was helpful to do that at the beginning. But one of the central characters in the story are these 5 women who stood up at that sentencing hearing in Molly's defence. And what's critical in the book is that I examine the statements they gave initially, and all 5 of them changed their statements. And then I got access to their second statements. And what emerges is that in each case, they were making allegations of domestic abuse by Jason, but not one of them had actually seen anything. Their single source for all of their allegations was Molly.
The villains are quite apparent in this, and there are kind of sub-villains, people who didn't do the right thing. Are there any heroes in this?
Well, I think Jack and Sarah are the heroes of the story. I mean, these were 2 ordinary kids cast into extraordinary circumstances. They were actually not just the victims of the crime, but they were the motive for the crime, because Molly was driven from the very beginning to take them from Jason. And they endured a very difficult teenage years, and they've emerged as 2 articulate,
I've met Sarah. She's fantastic.
Absolutely, very impressive children.
And of course, Tracy is a hero, and her husband. They are fantastic people too.
Mm. She had to go to the States, drop everything, and fight a custody battle to get Jack and Sarah back to Ireland, even though they had been named in the will as his guardians.
It's an extraordinary and compelling book. It's called A Deadly Marriage. The Netflix series, of course, is a deadly American marriage. This is an updated narrative, really, of what had happened. It's written by Brian Carroll, who's been involved for years now, published by Sandy Cove, in other words, an imprint of Penguin. And Brian Carroll, author of A Deadly Marriage, thank you very much for joining us in studio.